It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza.
Hello, Irwin.
I'm gonna open this episode, Esperanza, with my habit of being somewhat redundant.
You never.
You're very kind, but I love this topic.
Yes, and you know what? Redundancy is actually good because sometimes it's necessary to repeat things for it to actually be absorbed.
I'm going to go with that. I like that. And the episode today is really about a very prominent, back in the day, East Hampton family, not originally from East Hampton, but came to East Hampton. And ultimately, well, let's give the names first. It was Frank Wiborg,
yes,
and his wife, Adeline Mouton Sherman Wiborg. And by the way, we've touched on this in prior episodes. When there's multiple names, there's sort of a lineage going
there's
on.
a significance to that. Yes,
exactly. And to just give a little teaser from the very get-go regarding Frank and Adeline Mouton Sherman Wiborg. And this is a quote: "Marrying Adeline transformed Frank Wiborg from up and coming to already there." And part of her lineage was her uncle, Senator John Sherman, the writer of the legislation for the Sherman Antitrust Act.
Yeah,
Still going on to this day.
No one. That's just
exactly. And we're gonna get it. We're gonna get in there. There was the daughter and son-in-law who added a whole other element of the story. The builder, George Eldridge, Sea Spray Inn.
Right. Yes.
Hampton Star Building. We got a lineage and a history there. And we're going to segue in as we go along with the architect they hired, Grosvernor Atterbury, who has there's so many connections here. Esperanza said at the start of this episode, "Do we have enough time for this?" I said,
it's juicy,
it's
as
juicy
my son
and
would
meaty.
say.
Yeah, or meaty, a word we've used here in the past. So yes, and of course the house itself, which we'll get into, is probably the star of the show. But we're going to start the story with a great article from the East Hampton Star from 2019. So we're circa 4 years ago at this point, and that article started with this line, Esperanza: "If you ever wondered what the grandest house in East Hampton was a century ago, Frank B. Wiborg's The Dunes would be a top contender." I'd say that's a pretty fair statement.
No doubt.
No question.
And yes.
And by the way, there's a beach called Wiborg Beach in East Hampton Village. That didn't just get its name from anybody.
That was all his land. This man owned a whole lot of land in East Hampton.
He certainly did, and it overlooked
even where the Maidstone Club, I think, was originally his. No,
his acquisitions, and now this is another excellent Esperanza Leon segue. We were getting to this anyway. To quote Calvin Tompkins' book, "Living Well is the Best Revenge," Wiborg, God, I even love the title, right? Wiborg was a genuine land baron, and his East Hampton holdings, according to that Calvin Tompkins book, encompassed, 600 acres.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, and as he said, this is a mind-blowing parcel by any measure. And one that today, now they're going back to 2019, conservatively estimating it at $1 billion. It could be 4 years later in this insanity even more.
Right.
If you put a dollar sign. And Esperanza, if you recall episodes we've done previously on the Bell Estate,
that's what I was thinking. Yeah. I was thinking of the Bell Estate. This blows that out of the water.
And the same thing with Bayberry Land in Southampton. It was more acreage. So, and again, you could argue even primer oceanfront.
Well, I was I was going to add that this was all shoreline, right?
Crazy stuff. So, but who were these people? I guess we should really briefly talk about that, Esperanza. Frank Wiborg, born in Cleveland in 1855, graduated, and we'll just push through because we don't. It's not. This is not really. This is while it's a Frank Wiborg story. It's really we want to get to the parts germane to East Hampton. He went to work for Levi Alt, and this is where the story gets pretty cool. Who sold printing ink.
Mm.
Their relationship soon developed into a partnership, and in 1878, they founded the Alt. 1878. He's 23 years old at this time. I mean, okay. Founded the Alt and Wiborg Company in Cincinnati, which would become a top producer and distributor of inks and lithograph supplies. By the time he was
like the go-to for ink.
Esperanza, do you think it's fair to say if you were using a pen in this era, you were using Wiborg's ink?
Yes.
I'm going with that.
I'm going to go with that too.
Okay. So by the time he was 40, Wiborg was a self-made millionaire. Again, when $1 million really meant something 100 years ago, with offices all across the country and around the world. Yet, while they were from Cincinnati, you know, I've just thought of this connection, which I want to segue myself here real briefly. The Procter and Gamble families from the Devon colony, Cincinnati based also. I'm going to guess they might have been some kind of connection, which we could explore another day. Maybe,
it's
right?
interesting to think how they ended up at this far end of Long Island, right?
Cincinnati,
not being in New York. Yeah,
exactly. Well, you know, or go somewhere closer, lakefront and around Michigan, one state north. You know, but
I guess it's safe to say if he had offices all around the country and around the world, New York was probably the place to be. You know, sort of a Gilded Age kind of thing, and was the summer colony, was the start of the summer colonies out here.
Apparently, yeah, I would go with that. So they were summer vacationers. They rented, and you know, here's Esperanza, another thing we've spoken of, how in this era, even prominent families were renting rooms.
Yes, yeah, boarding house kind of thing. Yeah, exactly.
A sneak preview, our Hamptons podcast audience. Esperanza and I have been banging around. We got to do a boarding house episode, and like this sort of plays into it.
Absolutely.
This is a prominent family. Money was no object, and yet, I guess due to the scarcity of where you could rent, or it was boarding houses, or maybe small cottages in the village and in Amagansett.
Yeah.
But they did purchase this property in the spring of 1909 from a Mrs. Marshall Smith, and the house itself, the Dunes. It was born in 1912. So they started this. They built it in 1909. It was basically finished between 1910 and 1912. It was done with the assistance of, and we'll talk about him a little bit more later, Grosvernor Atterbury. Really a Southampton base, but a lot of prominent projects in New York, the Met's American Wing, and Forest Hills Gardens, Queens, which is an extraordinary community we'll get to in a little bit. So we had that, and the builder. Now, Esperanza, we spoke about this earlier, George Eldridge. He's come up a few times in our Hamptons podcast.
Yes.
Sea Spray Inn, East Hampton Star Building, right? So that's who was there. So the pre-existing, so this is where we were. And the Dunes, when it's completed, was a 30-room stucco mansion, considered the largest estate in East Hampton. Now, we've gone down this grandeur path before with both the Bell Estate and Bayberry Lands in Southampton. But, you know, imagine the grounds: sunken Italian gardens, stables, a dairy barn, garages, a laundry house, servants' quarters.
So if I'm not mistaken, part of that estate continues to exist, very modified now, but there's a pink house?
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct.
Just on highway behind the pond and on that curve. That is part of the original estate.
That is correct. And it's a great point.
Which was the dairy. I think that was the dairy.
I think that was where but it's a great point on multiple levels, because it also is an indicator of the sheer size of this holding. Remember, Wiborg Beach is more on the easterly portion of East Hampton Village. It's east of Main Beach.
Yes.
And this highway behind the pond is technically just west of Main Beach. So imagine all of this property, that expanse. He probably took in Hook Pond views as well.
Wait, no,
over there.
highway behind the pond is the road that leads to Wiborg Beach.
Pardon me.
Yeah,
Stand corrected.
not West End. You know, I think you're talking about Georgia K area.
Yeah, she's all right.
This is my
Yeah,
neighborhood.
this is
This is where I
that
grew up.
that's her lane. We do very little editing on our Hamptons podcast. This might be something I would consider editing out, but no, I like Esperanza correcting
No,
me
I think
sometimes.
it's
Okay,
it's fine. It's fine. We're just situating everybody.
It wasn't a reprimand.
No, not at all. You just confused me for a moment.
And I confused myself. I discombobulated myself because, to your point, yes, you are correct. Because highway off the pond runs off a further lane west of Egypt Lane.
Right.
So okay. So there we geographically set it in place. Okay, so that's where we are with the dunes. 30 rooms, stucco, not a common building material, by the way, out here at that time, if I'm not mistaken either. But this is, I think, a good part to now. We'll start to morph a little bit, bring the kids into play. Their daughter, eldest daughter, Sarah Murphy. Now, Sarah Murphy became famous in the 1920s. Now, remember, this is still the era of the dunes. She was a literary inspiration for F. Scott Fitzgerald. You know, the whole. Now, would we say that was it? It wasn't for the Great Gatsby. Was it for the Great Gatsby? I'm not sure. I mean, Great Gatsby was really West Egg, East Egg, North Shore of Long Island, but she was an inspiration in some way, shape, or form for.
They
F.
both
Scott
were,
Fitzgerald.
yeah. She and her husband, Murphy,
Gerald Murphy.
Gerald
correct.
Murphy. Yeah, she was also great inspiration for many artists. You know, they spent a lot of their time in Europe. So anyway, but
That is
we're getting away from East Hampton.
But it is.
But
we're actually.
But we're going to go there, right? Because they brought all of that here.
These segues are just unbelievable because that's exactly where we are.
I love this story.
It is such a great story. I mean, it just. I know there's my redundancy again. I apologize, our Hamptons audience, but I can't help it. I'm excited about the story, and just to put a little, to sort of put everything a little bit into play. And we're going to get into the Wiborg Murphy, the Gerald and Sarah Murphy. Gerald Murphy's business was Mark Cross.
That was the family business. Yeah.
Yes. Leather and everything else. I think did they even make pens?
I was just going to say, I was wondering how that might relate.
Yeah, I mean,
but I think it was
mainly
the leather goods. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like, is this the rich getting richer? Hey, father-in-law, can you do a deal on the ink for me?
Yeah, exactly. One hand washes the other.
Yeah, apparently so. So touching on the children for a second, and now we're going to go back. This was a great article I uncovered when I was researching the story Esperanza from New York Magazine. And it's relevant, even though it's 17 years old. We're going to go back to 2006. But, Gerald and Sarah Murphy, now they married in 1915. They were young, obviously.
I think she was actually a little older than him.
Gerald was 16 and Sarah was 20. And they met at a party in East Hampton where the Golden Age's millionaires were just beginning to erect mansions along these sands. So Gerald's parents were actually in Southampton at this time. That's where he was from. Oh, and here, Esperanza, speaking of the literary connection, F. Scott Fitzgerald used them for both of them.
Tenders, and I was trying to remember. Yes,
exactly. We got a little ahead of
drivers
before, but the drivers, exactly. But again, let's go into their lifestyle. The 20s were spent living on the Riviera with their 3 children. They bought. I'm going to let Esperanza read that word. The Cap d'Antibes. Antibes. How are we
Cap d'Antibes.
Exactly. We got Esperanza for that. She's much more international in flavor than me. I'm still basically from Queens, but again, just to give you this example, Gerald was a painter as well, and I mean, he
a really good one, actually. Yeah,
I mean, was he did he? He wasn't making a living as a painter.
No, but he was a really excellent painter, and I think there's a painting at the Museum of Modern Art of his. I'm not sure, but not a lot of his work survives. So. Right. Anyway.
And, to talk about the friends that they were entertaining at the time, it was Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Cole Porter, same type of people that come over to my house, you know. But again, it comes back how, look, their life was,
Picasso, I mentioned
yeah,
before. Yeah.
exactly. Their lives were far from perfect. I mean, they both died before adulthood. Their kids were ill and had, so, of their three children, I think only one, Honoria, became the sole heir of everything. But I guess here's where things start to change, Esperanza. Even though they were living the whole family, the Murphys and the Wiborgs were living this Gilded Age. The 600 acres was shrinking, and when the Gerald and Sarah moved there in the 30s, they were starting to sell off parcels, and by the 1930s, they were down to 80 acres.
Mm.
And
still quite a great deal.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we're not going to, when no one's sneering at 80 oceanfront acres, obviously, but it's a significant drop off. And again, it's also like sort of a familiar theme with these kind of estates, Esperanza. We've spoken about this, even with like the Rennert property in Sagaponack. What's their future? People don't really live like this.
Right. And inevitably, right, the Murphys had to, I mean, it was just sad, but in a way good, I guess, demolish the dunes because they couldn't sell it. Nobody wanted the 30-room mansion.
Correct.
And I mean, this is, nearing wartime, I mean, it's post-depression and
exactly. Exactly.
Not a good time to sell a 30-room house.
The great point about the Depression, I mean, the research I did really they didn't really get into whether Murphy and or Wiborg were losing, I don't think they became bankrupt. I don't know. I'm sure they had money in the stock market. I'm sure they took a hit. I don't know if that was the motivation for changing their life. It probably was part of it. But again, just the managing something like this, the expense, and again, they had some health issues. It just wasn't the way to live.
Yeah.
But now we're fast forwarding this. And it's interesting because it brings up a person we're both familiar with, Laura Donnelly, who was writer for the Star,
yes.
And was apparently the granddaughter of Sarah and Gerald Murphy.
Yes.
So they built a house they called the Little Hut next to the servants' quarters and garage in 1959. And the daughter, Honoria, which I assume is Laura's mother, was Laura's mother. Mm-hmm. Okay, you would know, yes. They dubbed that the Pink House. And that's the Pink House you referred to.
Correct.
Also, now, have you seen that property, Esperanza? Are you familiar with it, the aesthetics of it at all, or not?
Yeah, I mean, it is the Pink House. It's stucco, and then it was acquired. Gosh, I mean, over 10 years ago now, and really quite renovated in a way that probably destroyed most of the integrity that it had, although it wasn't, it wasn't like a significant architectural structure in the sense of like an Atterbury building, but it was still had the significance of having been the home of these people.
Right.
Yeah.
And apparently
which is right, it's right on Hook Pond, by the way. Yeah.
So I mean, you can, but it's visible from the road, in other words.
Oh, totally. Right on. Yes, right on the road.
I should really confess that I'm sort of so bad with colors. Like if you told me the house was pink, I would say, really? I tend to wear I wear a white Oxford shirt and chinos because I can't go wrong, but yeah, maybe I'd need someone to point, maybe I'll have to go with you or Rachel one day and hey, Irwin, that's pink. That probably would be helpful. But apparently the house, part of the impetus for the demolition and whatnot was there was damage to it in the thick hurricane of 38.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. To the dunes. So, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And they actually had the East Hampton Village Fire Department burn it to the ground as a training exercise. And that's how, and that's what happened, which was in 1941. Mm-hmm. And, so that's what really, went down, at this point in time. But Grosvernor Atterbury, we'll just backtrack a touch while we sort of segue into him a little bit. This was his first major commission on Eastern Long Island. And again, this is a guy that ultimately, as we're going to speak of shortly, Forest Hills Gardens, the Met, everything else. And he did work in Southampton as well, but this was really his first his first really main project out here.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, we're calling this is another article we found, which was, this is still from New York Magazine, actually, but, excuse me, this is from a interview from Nicole Borliski.
Borilski, yes.
Borilski, thank you for that. See, not only is her international expertise helpful, she does correct my pronunciation.
Well, Nicole's a family friend, so
okay, and she knows my Queen's linguistic sort of massacre name. So thank you, Esperanza. I'm truthfully grateful. And the architect Anna Serkin, who this was from a Hamptons.com story. Again, same time frame, I think, around 2019.
Yeah. And interestingly, I think this architect Anna Serkin has spoken about, sort of the big home syndrome. So it's interesting that she should be interviewed about this particular,
yes,
about Atterbury, but this particular estate also.
Yeah, because again, now another great segue, not even in our outline today, but is something Esperanza brings up that really does merit being mentioned here. So much of what we talk about going into present day is the supersizing of houses and everything else. And while we've always had the caveat, even when discussing it, the bookends of East Hampton and Southampton always had this. This is nothing new, but great point to bring in. It is sort of history repeating itself to an extent, the grandeur and everything else, but really true. But getting a little bit into Grosvernor Atterbury, just for a minute, with Forest Hills Gardens. That's what he's very, very famous for. Now, I am a guy from Queens, as we all know. And this enclave in Queens is extraordinary. I was telling this Esperanza before we went on air. It was, you had Russell Sage was involved in this land, the Russell Sage Foundation, Margaret Sage, the founder.
Olmsted.
Frederick Law Olmsted, was involved in the landscape design of this. There were 142 acres of land that they bought from Cord Meyer in Queens. And again, to our audience, I know this isn't our Queens, but we have to throw this in. Okay. I do want to start an Our Queens podcast.
Hey, Irwin, I said, we talk about the bookends of the Hamptons, but this is the bookends of Long Island, Queens and Hampton.
Esperanza has brought this up a few times, and she's exactly right. I feel guilty because I'm the Queens guy, but she's really unearthing how this stuff Queens does.
There's a connection.
It's amazing, how all this is. So, but again, you had, just to give a little bit of geography here in Queens. This is Western Queens, Forest Hills, even leaning into a touch of Kew Gardens, but really Forest Hills. But there is a forest park which straddles those two borders. That's where the landscape architect firm, Frederick Law Olmsted was developing that plan for the park. And then you have Margaret Sage, the Russell Sage Foundation. And this area, Esperanza used this when we were discussing this in advance. It's sort of aspirational in a sense, because these are not supersized houses. These are small lots. It's a very thought out urban development of beautiful houses, Tudors, some attached, some completely detached, very small properties. I'm going to guess if they're 0.2 of an acre, they're a lot.
But it doesn't look overcrowded and it doesn't feel dense, even though there is a density, right?
Correct. It does not feel dense. There's no.
It's sort of that garden city, and I don't mean garden city long. I mean like the principle of the garden city, like the British garden city that is livable, walkable.
Exactly.
Houses, kind of close together.
So exactly correct. And the walkable aspect, because I will tell you, if you go 1 to 2 blocks away from here, you are in the midst of the hustle and bustle of Austin Street, one of the busiest streets in Queens. 1 block further, you have Queens Boulevard.
And it's sort of like urban sprawl as opposed to this.
Urban sprawl, tremendous retail. Queens Boulevard's a highway. 8 lanes.
Right.
Yet you walk in this enclave. By the way, there's no parking on the streets. The streets
I know, because when we went to that concert at the stadium.
Another great segue. Yes, now there is a Forest Hills Stadium. Back in the day, that Forest Hills Stadium was the West End Tennis Club, West Side Tennis Club, which was where the U.S. Open was played. And again, it's in the middle of this residential area. Just a magnificent building. Also, Frederick, Grosvernor Atterbury had a hand in it, I believe. But that was the kind of community. And it was, to your point, Esperanza, the neighborhood was planned on the model of the garden communities in Queens. Its own inn, because at the entry to this, if you go to the cobblestone entry that straddles the commercial, welcome to our Queens podcast, that straddles that straddles the commercial and residential districts of this neighborhood. It is a wide cobblestone roundabout, to use a word that's very popular out here, which had the Forest Hills Inn, which was a hotel in the day, now is a condominium or co-op community. And these houses were just, again, not large, but narrow, the winding roads, winding intentionally to limit traffic.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and then again, you go out of here to the west, it's Metropolitan Avenue, the other side, busy urban Queens sprawl. You wouldn't know it existed when you were in this community.
And Forest Hills predates the Dunes? No. It's more from the 20s, isn't it?
It's somewhat simultaneous because the land, great question, the land was bought, the 142 acres was bought from Cord Meyer, the big developer, huge Queens footprint on all sides of Forest Hills to this day. They bought it in 1908. So this development was going on.
So it was kind of parallel, yeah.
Similar, right. And the railroad, Esperanza, in Forest Hills, remember the subways, we're talking the LIRR. There was a subway station opened in Forest Hills in 1911, the Queens Boulevard trolley line 2 years later.
That's amazing. And then I think about how, you as an architect would just transport yourself on the train, perhaps.
Right.
From a situation like this, of closer to Manhattan and to, sort of urban development.
Right.
And come out here and how, like, what the mindset was to work with clients like the Wiborgs to expand an original farmhouse, cottage, whatever it was that was on that land into this sprawling mansion.
Exactly. And completely true. And, by the way, it should also be brought out that in terms of Atterbury, this is another name, another name, East Hampton name we know. There was also another house he built, stucco, at the time, same era, a little bit earlier maybe, for Albert and Adele Herder.
Right. Yeah, the Creeks. Yeah, of course.
Exactly right. So this is stucco as well, which seemed to be sort of his.
The Herders had the Creeks, and then it was Alfonso Osorio, and today it's Ron Perlman.
Exactly. So Grosvernor Atterbury had his hand in the Creeks too, apparently, according to this story. So, but we should, to start wrapping things up to an extent and just sort of bringing everything full circle. So, and again, Atterbury, so between Forest Hills and then the projects he did in Manhattan, were just, he put his imprint rather, out on Eastern Long Island, I would say, with both the Herder property and the Wiborg property.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that that was the start. The Dunes was the start of his career, so to speak.
Yeah.
But then with things like Forest Hills Gardens, he was really trying to create housing for sort of lower middle class income families, right? I mean, that's why I was kind of asking that question before of how
I don't know if I don't think Forest Hills Gardens was ever
not lower middle class, but middle class.
I would say middle, or again, I couldn't find any information on what the price points were at those times, but just a line I always like to use with real estate, and we probably have used it on our Hamptons a lot of times. You know how good is always good?
Yeah.
Forest Hills Gardens has always been good. 100 years later, it's good.
That's what happens with proper planning and good design.
That editorial perspective by Esperanza Leon was proudly brought to you by our Hamptons podcast. But
You're welcome.
and we thank you for it. Absolutely. But really great community, just a great story. And it's just interesting how this is something I sort of just thought of. I mean, I'm going to say this extemporaneously, Esperanza. It's this place, our Hamptons, just the importance that 100 years ago, 100 plus, we've had people like Atterbury, like McKean, Mead, and White. These were people that were building houses out here 100 years ago. And then you bring it closer to present day, and you had the Andrew Gellers and everyone else.
Right. I was thinking, I mean, this is not always like the luxury build, you know,
Exactly.
I mean, this was, you know, you have Sheffer, you have Geller, you've got, I mean, Jaffe, you know, you've got from the beach, like the humble beach cottage to the dunes, the 30-room dunes.
And you know, I guess Esperanza, wow, this is really coming in organically here, but I'm just going with it. You know, the common denominator is this place.
It is, yeah.
This sense of place, the light, the ocean, the bays, the farmland, the forest, the topography, all things coming together that the reasons the artists want to be here, the writers wanted to be here, the greatest minds of our generation have been drawn to this place. Not to mention people of obvious financial means like the Wiborgs.
Yeah. We have to put our finger on that. What is it? What is it about this place? Who can explain this?
I just listed the sort of the obvious.
Right.
You know,
the natural.
The natural physical beauty. But, you know, to your point, Esperanza, this could be an episode, literally, the intangibles of this place. And there is, beyond the beauty and everything else, such a great point you just brought up. And I'm going with this now. What are those intangibles? Like, what is it? You went, you know, you came from South America. You lived in Toronto, as your history goes, and everything. You came back and you were drawn to come back here.
Yeah, I came back and I sat on the beach at Wiborg Beach, in fact.
There you go. Wow, what a segue.
And I said, wow, you know, I missed this. And I had, you know, there were beaches plenty in Venezuela, beautiful beaches. It's not the same.
And now that's a perspective from someone born in South America, but spent really her formative years, obviously, here. But so to give you mine, since we talked about Queens anyway, I was a guy from Queens, and I moved up island, and we lived in a lovely bedroom community, you know, in Great Neck, when my wife and I were married and raised our family there. But I will tell you, from the time 5 years into living in Great Neck, we bought our house in East Hampton. We always considered East Hampton home.
Yeah.
And
here you are, you know, right? Like this exactly. You chose this place. Or maybe it chose you. I don't know.
On that note, that's the perfect place to close, because that's very true. Either we chose this place or this place chose us.
Yes.
A rhetorical question, not that easy to answer, but Esperanza, that was a great journey. I really enjoyed
a little meandering through Wiborg and
exactly,
and you know, a sense of place, really.
Completely. You don't think we're going to get reprimanded for the Queens connections, do you?
No. Okay. I think we should do a separate podcast, in fact.
We're going to, wow.
Think about it, producer.
Wow. A discussion certainly for another day. Thanks so much, Esperanza. That was great.
Thank you, Irwin. Till next time.
Bye-bye. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.